The Miami Heat are on the road because the league never stops moving, and neither does the team's front office. Could there be a potential trade for a superstar on the horizon? We look at the latest rumors on Trae Young, James Harden, and an old Heat favorite to see if they could wind up taking their talents to South Beach on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So we've got a bunch of trade rumors piled up that we have yet to talk about, David. Trae Young may be unhappy in Atlanta. James Harden, big Christmas Day Woj bomb, possibly looking somewhere else other than Philadelphia to get the contract that he wants. Maybe a return to Houston. Maybe he's open to other ideas. And then the latest one, LeBron James. How much longer can he just toil in what is less than mediocrity with the Los Angeles Lakers? Maybe a move is best for him. It's not like it would be the first time that LeBron James moved in order to compete for a championship. Maybe Miami could be a spot. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about all three of these guys, their potential fits in Miami, how they can make something like that happen, and whether or not we think it's even a realistic option. We'll start with Trae Young, then James Harden, then LeBron. The Trae Young thing. Chris Haynes reporting a couple weeks ago that rival executives believe that Trae Young could be the next young star to request a trade. Now, before we get into this, just a brief sort of explanation on just the reporting and stuff around trade deadline. When I hear rival executives, I am very quick to just say, you know what? I don't care anymore. Rival executives talk all the time. They talk over beer. They talk over sandwiches. They just throw out trade rumors. All this stuff, it's always the same names. This thing becomes like sort of this echo chamber feedback loop thing. Like, hey, Cam Reddish would be a good fit on the Lakers. A rival executive says, you know what? I read online that Cam Reddish could be a good fit on the Lakers. Now all of a sudden a rival executive said that Cam Reddish could be a good fit on the Lakers. That's a lot of the way that this kind of stuff works. That said, the Chris Haynes thing, it's not like the Trae Young stuff here with Atlanta. It doesn't really feel like it's a long-term fit, right? Like something's got to have to give. How many coaches can Trae Young get fired in Atlanta before he ultimately just goes, you know what, I want out of here? Understanding that superstars want out all the time and demand trades all the time, Trae Young asking to get traded from the Atlanta Hawks is not the hardest one to believe.
No.
So I look, whether or not rival executives know anything, I think there are teams in the league looking at the Hawks, looking at Trae Young and saying, something's got to give here. And what ultimately gives could be Trae Young saying, you know what? Get me out of here. I want to go somewhere else. If that's the case, what do you think about Trae Young, the Miami Heat? Is this something that they should explore?
Well, I think as far as the rumor is concerned, I agree. I think normally rival exec talk isn't something to be taken all that seriously because it's just, hearsay, or you could just be putting something out there specifically to kind of stir the pot a little bit. But you're right. Young seems unhappy in Atlanta. He can't seem to make it work. And everything is set up. This is his team. They've traded players in the past. They've acquired players in the past. They just acquired DeJounte Murray specifically to help make up for some of what Young lacks. And yet he seems unhappy with Nate McMillan. He was unhappy before with Lloyd Pierce. And yes, those coaches both have their issues, but it seems like the issue might be more on the Young side of the equation than anything else. And so I think from Miami's perspective, you're looking at a young player that does provide a lot of what Miami might be looking in terms of shot creation, three-point shooting, the ability to get to the line, superstar status, and fits alongside the right window with not just Jimmy Butler, but Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro specifically. I think if you acquire, and again, I'm not even sure that we're looking at what you would have to trade in order to get Young in the first place, but in terms of why he would make a lot of sense here, that's it. he's both a win now and a win later type move. And that might be the very best option for Miami. Miami might be able to swing a trade for a win now type player. We've seen the Lakers do this, and yet it hasn't necessarily helped other than a championship a few seasons ago. Now they're kind of stuck in this perpetual rebuild of mediocrity, and it hasn't exactly worked out the way they wanted to. It might, in fact, lead to LeBron James leaving the Los Angeles Lakers. So when you look at what the Heat can do, they can bring in a player like young enough, talented enough, good enough, where he would fit in not just right away, but also be part of the team's future down the road. So I think it makes a lot of sense, just from an objective standpoint there. I think it does fit in every possible window, every possible scenario Miami could be looking for in terms of what they want from a superstar.
He's an out-of-the-box all-star point guard, right? Just ready to go, plug and play. He is an offense into himself. Like that. At 24 years old, he made the all-star team, his second season in the league. You look at his offensive blocks plus minus stats, all the advanced analytics. They love Trae Young. This year, not so much. His shooting percentages are down, but that's what we're talking about right now. Like, he seems unhappy. There's a lot of weird stuff happening in Atlanta, but it's probably too extreme to call him a distressed asset, but he is having a down season. And we've seen this, but his track record speaks for itself. Last year or this year, he's
all-star, right? I mean, that's just the reality of his numbers. Again,
he could still make the all-star team this year on a bad season for him, right? And so he's 14th in offensive box plus minus this year. That's right about where Jimmy Butler is. So again, bad year for Trae Young, but if you could sort of double the production that you're getting from Jimmy Butler offensively, and we all know how important Jimmy Butler is to the Heat's offense, you can get another guy who has that level of an impact at the very least, right? At his worst, he has a Jimmy Butler level impact offensively. That's pretty great, especially considering that he's 24 years old. And by the way, his contract takes him through his age 28 season through 2027. So you also got him long-term, potentially, depending if this trade goes down sooner rather than later. Last season, talking about offensive box plus minus, he was fourth in OBPM behind just Nikola Jokic, Giannis, and Joel Embiid, all three of them MVP candidates last year. Ahead of Kevin Durant, Luka Doncic, Steph Curry. I mean, come on, that's great company, and he's routinely keeping that company. You go back a year before that, 13th in OBPM. The year before that, 8th in OBPM. That again was his second year in the league. The Hawks' offensive rating has gone up and down. 20th this year, 2nd last year, 9th the year before that, 25th in his second season. I tend to think that if the Hawks, they're having shooting problems just like the Heat have, where they're just missing a ton of open shots. If you put shooters around Trae Young, that's a top 10 offense. Period. End of story. It just is. And the other part I think about, Bam Adebayo has been asked so much to be this sort of offensive producer, not just the fulcrum on offense who's getting guys involved and the ball flows through him. He's great with the ball flowing through him, Bam Adebayo is. But there's been so much responsibility heaped onto his plate to not just let the offense flow through him, but also just put up 25 points a night. And that's a really hard balance, and it's one that very few players can strike. And Bam's been doing a good job so far. But if you could take that off of his plate and make him more of a Draymond type guy that could also, by the way, score 20 points per game in a way that Draymond just can't anymore. But you can kind of just put him in that secondary or even tertiary role. I just think what he does from a playmaking standpoint, defensively, everything that he provides, it would just, all that stuff would heighten. He is begging for a player like Trae Young to play off of, right? A guy who could control the ball, come off of his screens, they could just have this two-man game and all this stuff. And I can already hear Heat fans listening to this and saying, we already have that in Tyler Herro. And that is true. Tyler Herro is getting there, and I think that's an important part to think about here. But Trae Young is just a more amped up version of all of this stuff. And those
are the pros, though. Those are the pros. It makes a lot of sense. The cons there is what you kind of hinted at the end. Like, you've already got somebody that's burgeoning as a star in Tyler Herro, and already that fit, we talked about it earlier in the year, looked clunky to start, has improved of late. Eric Spoelstra, after last night's Lakers win, talking about the evolution of Tyler Herro as a playmaker, and we've seen it. He's been much more in control in a way that he hadn't been earlier in the season. Now he seems much more comfortable. Even when his offense or his shot-making ability hasn't been on point, he's still a much better fit in that starting lineup than he was earlier in the season. Now, all of a sudden, you're rocking the boat considerably by bringing somebody in Young that is going to have the ball in his hands. Well, needs the ball in his hands in order for him to be effective.
Yeah, and
so
you might have to get
the ball,
and you might have to get rid of Tyler Herro in a trade to get Trae Young. Like I would assume that the Hawks would ask for Miami's best young player, and that would be Tyler Herro. The other problem with Trae Young is the shooting is not as good as Tyler Herro's. Like he's only shot above 36% one season in his entire career. That's not good, and I tend to believe that he's more of a volume scorer than an efficient one. Tyler Herro's catch and shoot numbers, the pull up numbers, all that. He is getting to the point now where I think going into the year we considered him a top percentile in the league catch and shoot kind of guy. It's getting to the point with his pull up numbers, man, and just the way he's able to create these shots and the clutch shot making at the end of games. The way we saw the last 2 Heat wins, where he's just flat out one of the best shooters in the NBA. Tyler Herro is. He's developed into that. Trae Young isn't that. Trae Young is miles and miles better as a passer, playmaker, facilitator. But in terms of just the shooting, I do have concerns with Trae Young. And then he doesn't move without the ball. All this stuff that we're talking about is theoretical. Like that 2-man game with Bam Adebayo is predicated on Trae Young doing a Steph Curry impression where he's running around the arc and doing all this activity. But if you just turn Bam Adebayo into Clint Capella, I don't know how much value he has there, right? I mean, yeah, he can make plays out of the short roll and stuff like that, but like you're sort of putting a ceiling on all the creative stuff that Bam could do as a playmaker. I don't know that Trae Young can thrive off the ball or if he even wants to. I actually think he has the ability to, but I don't know that he wants to. The other problem, too, is that he's the worst defender in the NBA. Tyler Herro has turned himself into a below average to average defender, which is way better than where he was last year. Trae Young isn't even close to that, which says a lot. That's not hyperbole. He is the worst on-ball defender. He is the worst defender. Size, 1-2, all of it. Not there. Does not care about the defensive end. He's the worst defender in the NBA. That don't fly in Miami, David.
No, you're absolutely right. To add to that also, he's also somewhat of a malcontent. I hate labeling him that way, but again, we've seen that he's just unhappy. And being given the keys to the car this early on and to crash it not once but twice now, and to really not do anything. It's not like he's taking the car to work or taking the car to school. He's just using it to drive around the city aimlessly. That's basically the Atlanta Hawks in a nutshell.
He's a teenager with a Porsche.
Crashing.
He's a teenager he's a teenager with his dad's Porsche.
This is your third sports car in almost as many years, and now all of a sudden you can't seem to be happy with it. I don't know that kind of fits what Miami is looking for.
Yeah.
They've also got a proven track record of acquiring superstars when they're towards not necessarily the tail end of their careers, but when they're proven commodities and are hungry specifically for a championship.
This is not the trade that Pat Riley makes, right? He makes late career Alonzo Mourning, right?
Or even mid-career. Yeah, it's like
he gets mid-career. He gets LeBron at 27, 28 years old. Like that's the other part of this. If you trade for Trae Young, I'm assuming that you're giving up all of it. Just all the picks, the Tyler Herros, the Nikola Jovic's, all of it. You're just giving up all of it. And maybe that gets you Trae Young. That's not even the conversation we need to have right now. But you're giving up all of it. And yes, Trae Young is 24 years old, but he's on a 5-year contract that's going to pay. He's in the first year of it right now. That's going to pay him $215 million overall. $40 million next year, $43 million the year after that, $46 the year after that, $49 in the final year. He'll be 28 years old. I would assume at that point, look, hey, you still got him. He's young. You hopefully have had success with Trae Young in Miami. You can hopefully re-sign Trae Young at that point, and you've got him maybe for the rest, the most important parts of his career. And so in that respect, it's almost like buying low and early on a franchise player potentially. But you've got to really believe that Trae Young is that franchise player. And right now, what he's shown me, there's a lot of parts of Trae Young's game that I like, but if I'm going to do all of it, and I'm going to commit to Trae Young for not just the next 4 years, but thinking, hey, this has to go right in a way that we would want to re-sign him for another 4 or 5 years. That's committing to this player for the next decade. Is this the guy?
Right.
All the things that we just said with the personality stuff and the heliocentrism and all this stuff, maybe he eventually matures and grows out of that. Do I want to make that bet if I'm the Miami Heat? That's the biggest question for them in regards to Trae Young. So any other final thoughts on this?
No, a lot of due diligence required on their part. I think you'd have to let's assume that Bam makes the All-Star team. I think that's where we'll see a lot of the kind of networking that might be required for the Miami Heat, because we've already heard that Bam is the next player to be the centerpiece, the building block of the Miami Heat culture. When Udonis retires at the end of the season. And so now Bam goes there, starts kind of poking the bear a little bit, finding out from Trae how likely it is. Does he fit Heat culture? He reports back to Eric Spoelstra. Let's say Spo and Trae are a Team USA later this summer. Then again, adding things to it at the end there. I think there's potential there. There's a lot of pros. There's a lot of cons there. And yet this does seem like the swing for the fences move.
It is
that Miami could be interested.
Yeah, I agree.
So
Look, I mean, Trae Young,
if
Trae Young's a top 10 offense and Bam Adebayo is a top 10 defense, again, with the right guys around them, you have to just put 3-and-D players around both of them. Jimmy Butler eventually, obviously, would be part of this, I think, and then eventually he ages out. I'm talking about 6 years from now.
Right.
That's the recipe on paper. You got to really want to invest in Trae Young in a very, very meaningful way, in the person Trae Young.
They have that kind of faith in their culture, right?
I don't know.
They'll be the first to say our culture isn't for everybody, but when you're a part of it, and if they believe that Young is capable of buying in, they'll make the move in a heartbeat.
Would you rather have Trae Young at $50 million a year or Tyler Herro at $25 million a year and all the assets too? That's also just part of the equation here if you're thinking about it from the front office's perspective.